Hi everyone, hope you're doing well. Today we're going to be talking about A Room of One's Own, which is an essay actually by Virginia Woolf. I saw this book in a bookstore in Gurgaon and I was so excited because I've always had trouble reading essays, but this is like a graphic novel version of it. I saw this and I was like, I have to get this, and I actually ended up reading it finally. So I have my notes over here. We'll be talking about the essay itself. What does it cover? The contents, the summary, a little bit of analysis. This essay is from 1929, where Virginia Woolf was given the topic women and fiction, and she had to write an essay on that. So she basically constructed it in a way. It has 6 different chapters. But also, before I start, actually, there is a YouTube video about a performance art version of this. I just randomly happened to stumble upon that video, but if you're willing, you can watch it here. It's a very good performance and it does cover the essay in its totality. So breaking it down into 6 chapters, basically chapter 1 is Virginia Woolf pondering over the question of women and fiction. What does it mean? Does it mean women? Does it mean fiction? Does it mean women who write fiction, or the fiction that's written about women? Woolf is sitting in the grasslands in Oxbridge University, if I'm not wrong. Then she's walking in. So basically in that university there are 2 paths, right? There's a path of gravel and there's a part of like the nice soft grass, and she's walking on the grass. And then there's a beetle, like a security guard or someone, who comes up to her and he's like, you can't walk here. This is only for the gentlemen, the scholars. If you want to walk, you can walk through the path of the gravel. And over here, of course, Virginia Woolf is like a popular name. She is a qualified artist. She's a qualified author, and she's being told that, oh, you can't take this way, you have to go the other way. It's not a question between, oh, I am more qualified than you ever will be. It's a question between, oh, I am a woman, he's telling me what to do and I have to do it. Also, then she tries to enter the library of Oxbridge University, but she is denied access because, again, she is a woman. She needs to be accompanied by a man, by a scholar, by someone else to even enter the library. She's obviously in a position where she's like, okay, yeah, sure. The grass, the lawn over here, it can represent the male privilege, which is like out there in open sight, and how women have to kind of restrict themselves. They have to kind of walk the path of gravel. And I don't know if this is what Virginia Woolf meant, but I also think it kind of shows that, women and men could be walking down the same path, and how it is always easier for the man to walk his path, and it's always difficult. Of course, the grass is obviously easier to walk on, and it's like the man and the woman could be doing the same thing, but if a man is doing that, the woman, of course, has to face more criticism. She has to face more societal pressure, all of that, to walk the same path, right? So I think it can also be a representative of that. Also, it talks about the limitation that women have in terms of their education, and how, of course, limitation in education will result in less women in fiction, less writers, less representation in literature. And if anything, for the longest time, it's even when this book was published, 1929, there were not a lot of videographic, records. Mostly people relied on literature. And if we only had men authors, like men story writers, we are not getting actual accounts of women. This also talks about how the material aspects, money, security, finances, all of these things, people like to, dismiss it, but all of these things are important if you want to make it in life. All of these things do shape up the opportunities that are available to you. It also talks about how then she goes to a luncheon in like a women's college, right? And then the food is so bad, like she basically gets a soup, and the soup is so thin, right, that if the bowl, like it was a white colored china dish, so if the bowl had any patterns on it, even after pouring the soup in, you'd be able to see the pattern on the bowl. But the funny part is there is no pattern on the bowl, so it's just plain white. It just talks about how, uneventful, how less luxurious the food at the women's college is, how, like the experience of doing the same thing, like both men and women are in the same place, they're trying to do the same things, but men just have it easier. And the funny part is a lot of them might not even realize it. A lot of them might not even consciously be aware of that fact, and they're just like benefiting from it without even realizing that they're the benefiters. A woman could write all she wants in her life. She could have the greatest genius in the world, but if she doesn't get the opportunity to brush up her abilities, to talk to people, to develop these experiences, to have that knowledge in the first place, what can she write at the end of the day? The second chapter is basically she's trying to look for answers in history. Now, Woolf, in that pursuit of her thought, she's like, okay, let me look for answers. Let me go back into history and see what the trends have been saying, right? So she looks at literature about women. She tries to look at stories with female centric characters, all of that, and she sees that 90% of them, like most of them, have been written by men. Like the stories about whatever it is, it's all written by men. Of course, I mean, you can think of Jane Austen, the Bronte sisters, George Eliot. Like there are these few major names, but other than that, it's all men. And she's like, okay, so real experiences from women have never actually been known, because of course a man is writing from the perspective of women, right? We even see nowadays, as in our movies and everything, there's such a big difference in a character, like in a woman character, from a male director versus a female director, right? We see how that male gaze versus that female gaze like really defines and really distinguishes the same people. So over here, even if we are looking at accounts in history, we are looking at fiction, non-fiction, whatever that might be, we are looking at it from the lens of a man. So we never really know how those women really existed in real life, right? Because of course, a certain anger, resentment, this power struggle that can be there from a man's end towards a woman can really sort of tint up the picture that he ends up drawing for her, right? So if you're looking at someone from the lens of like resentment, that, oh, you know, she gets to do this and she gets to be this and I am here like this, so of course that will paint a very different picture. So we never really get to see the women in history for who they really are, right? And also she talks about this paradox where women in literature have been portrayed as these strong independent characters, right? Like they'll say something very intelligent, they'll do something like this, but in real life we know like women were not even provided basic education even at the time of this essay. Like there were so many restrictions, and the ratio from male student to female student, it was so low, right? So it's kind of like you can see the contradictions right over there, right in person. And of course that just shows how, you know, we are all that we're looking at in these olden stories are male figures' opinions about women and not actual women, like how they would like to paint that up. I think this also talks about how women have been like as if these mirror images, or as if these, you know, like companions to men. They've always been seen like, you know, a woman has always been painted in the light of her partners, like her father, her brother, her husband, her children. Like she's never been known for who she is as a person. Her identity has always been linked to a man, so much so to the point where, you know, her identity might be shrinked a little so as to make the man seem greater and bigger and, you know, more qualified than he really might be, right? And I think somewhere here she also mentions that there are so many writers, like so many well-known writers, like, you know, ahead of their time writers that she looks back to, and she's like, okay, some of their quotes were, okay, you know, a man, like the woman, the most superior woman is still inferior to a man, or something like that. And it's so devastating. We see a bit of that feminine rage also come out during this time of the essay, which is very, very understandable. She goes on to use this example of Shakespeare's imaginary sister Judith to kind of exemplify what it would have been like for women back in the day, right? So of course Shakespeare is the biggest name known in literature, but at the same time she talks about like at that time when Shakespeare was thriving, right? It's not about the fact that women were not, you know, intelligent. It's not about the fact that they were not capable and only a man could have written Macbeth or Hamlet or all of these things. Of course, she talks about how, imagine that Shakespeare had a sister named Judith, right? She was just as intelligent, as curious, and as playful in her energy as Shakespeare was. Of course, you know, we look at Shakespeare's account like from his real life and we see how he liked to play around, he liked getting into trouble, he, you know, pursued his education, he went into theater, he did all of that, right? So we look at the trajectory of Judith. She's just as intelligent, she's just as curious, but of course, first of all, she's not allowed to go to school, she's not allowed to pursue any sort of education. She might even, let's say, like William's books are lying around, she might even pick up a book once in a while, she might even try to read it, but then she might be told by her parents that, oh, you know, go stitch the stockings or whatever, like mend the stockings or cook food, or, you know, do not bore yourself with these books, you don't even need to do that, like none of this is required, right? And she, of course, she cannot write, right? She cannot like express her intelligence in any way. She might even, let's say, she might even like try to write, like she might even write up a few pages, but then she always has to make sure that she does it when she's alone because she's restricted, she doesn't want anyone else seeing it. She might even have to hide these pages, she might have to burn them, right? She might have to destroy any sort of evidence that she'll give to someone else that, okay, yeah, you know what, I do express interest in this category. She's not allowed education. She's expected to marry at a young age. So in her later teens, her dad might start showing her around that, okay, this is the guy, or that's a guy, there's a guy, this is pick one, whatever. And then she begs him. She like tells him that, no, this marriage is not good for me. I don't feel good. I don't want to do this, all of that. And then she gets beat by her father. And this is not to say that her parents don't love her, right? They love her, they want what's best for her, but sometimes even when a parent thinks that, okay, I want what's best for my child, they look at it from their experience that, oh, when I was young, this is what was happening, this is what I experienced, so I want to shelter my kid from that. This is not to villainize the parents or to say, yeah, societally everyone was that way back then, right? And just because you experienced something when you were a child does not mean your child is going to experience the same thing. The times are changing, things are changing, but of course that is not something that Judith's parents understand. She runs away to London to get any sort of opportunities. She goes up to theaters, she tries to take part, and everyone laughs at her because of course, they did not let women, girls play the role of women. Young men did that, apparently. So she's denied any sort of roles, anything like that, and then no one gives her any work. So she's of course in a place where she can't go back, she can't live here, she can't sustain here. Like, there's this man who takes pity on her, and they sort of enter into like a situation. She gets pregnant, and then she's just so devastated, she ends up killing herself. She dies young without ever getting to experience her potential or becoming the woman that she wanted to become, right? So we see how Shakespeare and Judith, both of them come from same backgrounds, both of them come from same families, both of them come from the same intelligence, but it ends so differently for one or the other. I even remember, as I am also like a literature student, we had this specific excerpt, like this specific chapter in one of our literature classes in first year, and that is when I was like, oh, I have to read the whole essay, and I finally read it. So this talks about how talent alone is not enough for you to go to places, get things done, right? You need social support, right? You need social barriers are always going to hold you back. They've always held women back. I'm sure they were, right? Even if there were women who rebelled against the system, who tried to get noticed, who tried to get visibility, I'm pretty sure the kind of narrative that we had at that point, history might have erased a lot of that. I think at a certain point she even mentions that, I'm pretty sure like if you would have let Judith grow and do the same things, she might have written a better, play than Shakespeare. And you never know, like, even if there are men who are taking up credit for all of these things, what if there were women who actually did that, but men end up taking credit for a lot of things? So chapter 4, and this is where we get to the main crux of the essay. This is what women need in order to write, like what is required for women and fiction. So this is where the popular line from Virginia Woolf comes in, about how a woman needs a room of her own and financial independence in order to write. Basically, she talks about how if she is given financial independence, for example, Virginia Woolf, she receives like $500 a year because one of her aunts died and she kept this annual sort of inheritance for her, and that allows her, that gives her that financial freedom for her to not depend on any man. And when you take that financial dependence of men is when you realize that, oh, you don't have to tolerate them, you don't even really like them, right? And you start to see them for who they really are. Of course, now we are in an age where it is, touch wood, a little bit better than what it used to be, but still, it's still so relevant in today's age. Any woman who is financially dependent on a man is more likely to take up a lot of bullshit, and of course, someone who is not will barely ever take any tantrums from a man, right? So she talks about how that financial independence is required. A room of one's own basically talks about the privacy to be able to write. On all of these examples we've looked at, Judith and all of these women that she talks about, and it's like how they did not have the privacy to write, right? They need like a space of their own, a space that they can call theirs to write and to have their creative thoughts like explode in their mind, right? So women need financial security, personal space, freedom from constant domestic responsibilities, and time to think, right? Like if they're not given time, if they're rushed through their process, see, no book is written in a year. there are no prodigies for authors and writers. You can have like a musician at the age of 6, you cannot have a perfect writer at the age of 6. You understand, this is a quality that takes time, no one's born with it. So she talks about how all of these things are required for women to flourish in literature. And the room, of course, is a literal workspace, and it's also a metaphor for independence and autonomy, because women never have had anything of their own ever. This is something that they finally get to call theirs, if that makes sense, right? Finally, not finally, chapter 5 is growth of women's writing. So of course now we are looking at women who have made it in this world. We are talking about Jane Austen, Charlotte Bronte, Emily Bronte, George Eliot, and all of these popular names that I'm pretty sure even someone who doesn't read, they've heard these names. Of course, Woolf admires them. She admires their work, all of that. But they had to, of course, she also acknowledges the fact, like she imagines what it would have been like to be Jane Austen, to be Charlotte Bronte, to have written Jane Eyre, right? And she understands the fact that they had to write under such restricted conditions. Like even if let's say they were women who were allowed to write, it's not like they were appreciated for it. Like no woman was ever appreciated for it. So of course they had to write under difficult conditions. They did not have a room of one's own, right? They were even limited by their social expectations. So let's say if a woman is like writing, she has to write like a man, right? Like she's a woman but she has to write like a man for it to do good, right? So not the ability to just be yourself and express who you are as you are, the ability to perform even when you're expressing your own emotions, right? So that is something that of course is a lens that does kind of make you question that, oh, maybe Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice could have been a so much better book if she did not have the responsibility or the pressure that she had to perform and to be just a woman, right? And it also talks about how anger and frustration can influence their work as well, right? Of course, a man writing a book versus a woman writing a book, especially in the olden times, there are very different pictures. A man writing a book is very much relaxed and he's like, okay, yeah, let me do this and let me do that. But a woman writing a book is very much like, okay, yeah, like she has so much going on. And I'm pretty sure these women, writing was not their full-time profession at all, right? Even if they were writing in their family, it might have been seen as like, oh, we're letting you do that, so you better, be thankful. So this is where my favorite, quote comes from. She says that for a long time in history, Anonymous has always been a woman, right? What I see is that, of course, this is a very, it says everything it needs to say. We are looking at how every generation of female writers makes it easier for the next, right? So as we see as time goes by, so Woolf sees how the evolution of women writers and how that restriction is kind of coming off with time. Women are having to not perform as much anymore, right? Like they can write like women rather than having to write like men and having to publish their books under anonymous or male pseudonyms, right? They don't have to do that anymore. So that is something she does admire and she is thankful for, but at the same time it's like, why would you want to why was it a struggle in the first place? Women need the literary predecessors in order for them to feel the strength and courage to shine more and brighter and get more ahead, so that it's kind of like a cycle, it's kind of like a chain reaction. She also talks about how, let's for example say Charlotte Bronte, right, wrote Jane Eyre, and she's not criticizing the book at all. She's not saying that Jane Eyre is not a good book. Of course it's a masterpiece, but she says that give Charlotte Bronte like $500 a year, give her a room of her own, and see how she would have written a much better Jane Eyre. So like every female writer that we see in history is limited in their work, in their potential, in the kind of way that they can show up for whatever it is that they want. So of course this does put you to question, like, oh my god, like all of these things that we're reading, this is only 60-70% of their potential, right? And finally we have the chapter number 6. So we looked at history, we looked at her contemplating things, we looked at her analyzing the present moment from history, and now finally chapter 6 is talking about looking into the future. So of course the future depends on creating these equal opportunities for men and women. Right now, the time that she's writing this in, of course there's a very visible distinction between men and women. I'm not saying that there's not any distinction right now. If we know anything, there's a lot of distinction even as of now, but it's kind of hidden, it's very passive. Over here we can actively see her being in that position, like her being asked to not visit the library, her being told to take the gravel and not the grass. She revisits that moment in her head again at this point in the essay, right? So of course she's aspiring for a future where women have education, economic independence, right, intellectual freedoms and equal opportunities with men. That is what's gonna ensure that they also get to be in a place where they can experience what it's like to write, and to write with freedom, and to express without having to perform. She introduces the idea of the androgynous mind. I hope I am saying that right. So basically, great writing comes from a balance of traditional masculine and feminine qualities. So as we see, we like to put people in boxes, especially women. We like to put them in a lot of boxes. We like to define them in a lot of ways, right? But also, every man has both masculine and feminine features. Similarly, every woman has both feminine and masculine features. That is what the androgynous mind is. Do not necessarily let yourself get to one side or one aspect of things, particularly for you to be like, okay, for a man to be completely masculine or for a woman to be completely feminine. We have to find that balance, and we have to write from a place of empathy, knowledge, and understanding of both the aspects of reality and existence, right? Writers shouldn't be limited by rigid, so basically, of course, it talks about how writers should not be limited by their rigid gender identities, and just by reading a line you shouldn't be able to tell if a man or a woman has written it, right? I think that is kind of what she's trying to say, if I'm not wrong. So basically, in conclusion to this whole thing, she talks about how if women get money, if they get freedom, if they get education, and if they get a room of their own, women writers cannot be stopped. The major themes, we are looking at economics, we are looking at freedom, gender identities, gender discrimination, unequal opportunities, the history, and how creativity is not just through talent. Situationally, how creativity is encouraged is also an aspect, right? And of course, we're looking at her most famous quotes here: a woman must have money and a room of her own if she wants to write fiction. Lock up your libraries if you like, but there is no gate, no lock, no bolt that you can set up on the freedom of my mind. So this talks about her being in a place where, as a woman who writes fiction, like, you can physically restrict her opportunities as much as you want, but mentally the cage of her mind has already been uplifted, and in her mind, like, she can explore and wonder. The ability of her mind to think so much and to draw up certain theories and to get to those details is something that you'll never be able to take away, and this essay is a very good example of that, right? So that is all for today. Thank you so much. I wish you all the very best, and take care.